All right. Hello. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to Network 2020's discussion about city diplomacy. Before I introduce our panelists, a few words about Network 2020. I am Courtney Doggart. I'm the president of Network 2020, and Network 2020 is a New York City-based nonprofit. And what we aim to do is bring nuanced, incisive conversations about global affairs to rising and established leaders, both virtually, like this one, as well as in person in New York. We have a really great season of events coming up, both in person and online. So I do encourage everyone to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also to subscribe to our YouTube channel or our Global Insights podcast to access our library of on-the-record recordings. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our three panelists today. So first, we have Pablo Fernandez Marmisol Daguerre. He is the Assistant Secretary General for Partnerships at United Cities and Local Governments, where he leads global alliances, including partnerships with the United Nations system and over 20 international organizations. And you can see there's a lot more to his bio as well. Next, we have Kristen Edgreen Kaufman, who is the Senior Vice President for Global Impact Initiatives at the U.S. Council for International Business. She is a contributor to Forbes and a trustee at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs and at Claremont McKenna College. She is also a member of Network 2020 and has worked a lot on city diplomacy. And last, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Raffaele Marchetti, who is a professor in international relations at the Department of Political Science and at the School of Government at Luis University in Italy, where he works on global politics and governance, hybrid and city diplomacy, transnational civil society, among other things. He is also the author of, among other titles, City Diplomacy from City-States to Global Cities. So welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And at Network 2020, we've been thinking about this conversation a lot. I'll just lay a little groundwork for why we wanted to have this conversation. In part, it's because New York City actually has a mayoral election coming up soon. And so we were just thinking a lot about the role of cities. But in general, a lot of the conversations that we've had over the past year have highlighted some of the different ways, the different architectures of engagement that are outside of what we might think of as traditional diplomacy. And I think subnational diplomacy is a really important area that has been just growing over the years, and we wanted to dig into it. So I really appreciate the three of you being here to have that conversation with us. So Raf, I would like to start with you. So just to set the scene for us, the view has sort of long been that diplomacy, as I said, is the purview of the state. But you argue in your book that cities are playing a role in vital areas of communication. Can you give us an understanding of how city diplomacy differs from that of nations, why cities are important in this picture? And then I think importantly is how those two, whether it's national governments or cities, work together or not to achieve goals.
Thank you, Courtney, and welcome to everybody. Well, first of all, we should remind us that cities were there before states. So for many centuries, cities like Venice, Chengdu, and many others were important players in the international level. Then for 3 centuries, more or less, from the 1648, famous Peace of Westphalia, up to, well, mid-20th centuries, states have been predominant, but then things have changed. In fact, this is part and parcel of the process of globalization that has opened up windows of opportunities for many non-state actors, cities, regions, provinces, but also civil society organizations, business actors, and so on and so forth. So cities took that opportunity and went global. For many reasons, for political reasons, visibility for mayors, but also for, in order to respond more effectively to the inputs coming from the citizens. And this is one important issue about city diplomacy. urban governance tend to be more accountable, at least in the democratic systems, because the distance between the decision makers and decision takers is shorter than at the national or federal level. So in that sense, city diplomacy, it is a democratic expression of the citizens. There are, of course, other reasons. It's not only about politics, it's also about economics and business. City diplomacy means attracting business, attracting events, corporations, students, tourism. So cities are there for many reasons, political, economic, cultural reasons, security reasons. Somehow cities also participates in conflict building, in peace building and conflict resolutions. There are many dimensions. One important dimension is the relation with the government. Sometimes cities play the international game alone, sometimes in competition with their own national governments. Think about the case of the sanctuary cities a few years ago in the US. This was also a competition between local governance and federal governance. Sometimes they play the international game in partnership, in synergy with the national government. And that is going to give an additional channel of influence, an additional channel of international projection to the national community at large. So the most sophisticated countries are by now deploying and learning how to use city diplomacy in order to increase their foreign policy effectiveness. So it's a complex picture, but one fact it's clear that more and more cities are investing time, resources, and people on international affairs, and this trend is not going to be stopped soon.
Thank you for that. Pablo, you've been working on this issue really at the ground level. What are some of the trends that you've seen when it comes to city cooperation and diplomacy? And just to kind of put this in perspective, how did we go, say, from what I would think of as the form of city engagement, which might be something like sister cities, to this much more almost technical and intentional architecture?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Courtney, and thank you to Network 2020 for the invitation and for opening their space and your space to talk about other types of multilateral systems and other types of people's relation and engaging with cities. First, in a way of setting the scene and being on the ground, we have to be crystal clear in terms of the municipal international movement. Was established in 1913, which is the multilateral system of cities goes before the United Nations and the League of Nations, before the wars in Europe per se. And this is the demand, and actually the very first meeting of the municipal movement, which was in Ghent in 1913, had the topic of the art of building cities and organizing community life. And with this, I think in 2025, we can still answer that the trends are trying to organize community life. And when we say community life is our commons, our common agenda, and being the sphere closest to people, cities tend to have their priority everyday life problems. And this goes from basic services to war, because in some places conflict is an everyday life problem, and it is mayors who stand there behind, still delivering when possible, of course, water, public services, electricity, and the matters of doing in any way their political mandate. This, in terms of the scope of time of our movement, that, as you were referring, Courtney, it is based in the sister system of cities, that going beyond a political and diplomatic relation between two territories is also bold, and this makes sense in today's international agenda, to have cooperation beyond national interest. And the sister city system started when the Cold War was the reality of our geopolitics. And Paris was able to establish relationships with Moscow, or Beijing was able to establish relationships with other cities outside mainland China. I give this in terms of, because we tend to be the teenagers of the international agenda for many ways of analyzing the international movement. And it's important to say that no, that cities have been doing international for many years, and that mayors have been doing international agenda for many years. Going to your specific question, Courtney, on what's happening today, first of all, which is bold enough to say, cities still believe on the multilateral system. And they still put many resources to maintain a multilateral system, both in the traditional way of engaging, which is the United Nations, the G20, but as well, they also have their own multilateral systems. And these are the city networks that are active, that they hold political representation, and that they have a political mandate to deliver to their constituents in terms of, and you name it, all the intergovernmental discussions. So I would say that the trend, and even though trends sounds like what are they innovating, the trend is to defend our commons in terms of what we have achieved in a peaceful world that talks to each other, keeping everyone in the table, trying to avoid as much as we can bilateral conversations in the international system where there is no power balance. And also by bringing the voice of a capital city, we are opening that space in the multilateral affairs system to a little town that also has much to say when discussing the intergovernmental. So I would say that the trend and the bold agenda that cities have today is to maintaining, supporting, and to continue advocating for a true multilateral system that can become more networked, more inclusive, and that represents the people, because the United Nations and the multilateral system has the mandate of representing with the people. I know I'm going very abstract, Courtney. Happy to go more into detail later, but I wanted to make this case before we started with the discussions and questions.
No, that's perfect, and I'd love to get to some concrete examples later. Kristen, turning to you, we've been talking about these alternative frameworks for diplomacy. In your professional life, you've worked a lot on economic and business ties for city municipalities and for associations, particularly in your current role. So how do the role of businesses and economic relationships fit into this subnational diplomacy picture, particularly when, at least in the US, I feel like we're seeing so many business-related decisions being made at the top?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Courtney and Brian and Network 2020 for hosting and convening on this very important topic. And it's great to be here with Rafa and Pablo. So economic relationships are really the connective tissue of diplomacy in this era of political fragmentation. And I see this every day in my current role at USCIB, where I'm representing over 300 Fortune 500 companies in the multilateral system. And I also saw this daily in my role working for New York City's Mayor's Office of International Affairs. When cities attract foreign direct investment, or FDI as we call it, they're not just securing capital, they're really building lasting international relationships and influence that create mutual stakes in each other's successes. This happens in practice when governors or mayors lead business delegations to other regions of the world. In my previous role, I curated roundtables between the mayor and CEOs from Europe and the Americas to bring FDI investment into New York City infrastructure projects and work closely with our Economic Development Corporation on that. These business partnerships foster public-private collaborations that obviously fund infrastructure, but they also make cities more invested in helping each other solve challenges, whether that's economic, social, or humanitarian issues. And subnational diplomacy gives local economies access to global capital and markets and helps foster innovation ecosystems. So Ukraine really illustrates this well. In 2024, then Governor Eric Holcomb of Indiana traveled to Ukraine with a business delegation to discuss how US business leaders could help rebuild the Ukrainian economy. Obviously did a lot to show our support and create strong bonds there, but also had the added benefit of bringing in much needed capital as they rebuild. In a similar vein, when New York City wanted to diversify its economy after the 2008 financial crisis into high growth areas like tech and life sciences, local leaders and the EDC, which is New York City's Economic Development Corporation, forged a partnership between Cornell University and Technion Israel Institute of Technology to build a state-of-the-art campus and ecosystem. This not only launched New York City's thriving health, life sciences industry and sector, but also created a strong bond between New York City and Haifa. So I think what all these examples show is that you really need for effective subnational diplomacy to coordinate between diplomatic functions and economic development agencies. Cities really need to integrate their international affairs offices with their EDCs to maximize business outcomes from these diplomatic relationships.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for bringing that point about the economic development corporations as well. Pablo, I'm going to go back, and we're starting with Raf, and then we'll finish with Raf. But Pablo, turning back to you, I'd love to get to some of these concrete examples that you suggested earlier. I'd hear from you some concrete ways in which you see city diplomacy really making progress, because I think now what we're seeing is a lot of just transnational challenges, and I know some of us are very much hoping that there will be progress being made, and maybe cities are the way forward. And so I'd love to just hear your take on concrete examples.
Thank you, Courtney. And I will go with priorities, giving some spaces that have been achieved and a different way of having conversations. And by this, in 2 weeks, and Courtney, I know Kristen is coming, we have the World Social Development Summit of the United Nations, and this is 30 years after Copenhagen. What we are trying to build, and as you know, we are discussing the post-2030 agenda. We want to go with a consolidated version to both the reform of the ECOSOC, the reform of the high-level political forum in the UN, and also a consolidated way of approaching what 2030 would look like. And this, one of the top priorities is housing. We are bringing the housing conversation to the multilateral affairs stage. We are bringing the right to housing as a right and as an accountability for the multilateral system that goes beyond the national spheres and competences to build a coalition which is called Mayors for Housing. It has their own regional chapters, and for instance, we're bringing to the European Commission from voices of mayors such as Barcelona, Rome, and Paris that housing is a priority and that we need to tackle the right to housing in a different way of going about it. Second, food systems and eradicating hunger. During the G20, President Lula from Brazil launched the Global Alliance to Eradicate Poverty and Hunger. What we are bringing is the commitment of over 250,000 mayors to eradicate hunger with social protection systems linked to this Global Alliance. Back to back, something that Raffaele was close to, which is the U20, which is a formal engagement group of cities to discuss with the G20 leadership each cycle. Cultural rights, for instance, we are advocating that SDG 18 should be about culture. As you know, there is no sustainable development goal related to culture, and this is something in the everyday life of the competences of a city, which is guaranteeing the right to culture. So together with the International Federation of Public Libraries, we are launching an advocacy campaign to measure data, to allocate money, and to have a cultural agenda there of where we go. And this, we just did it during Mundiacult, which is a culture summit of UNESCO. We have peace in our cities, which is tackling a different way of violence and a way of, and here we have stronger cities and many other ways of organizing, which is a way of bringing about the potential that mayors and local leaders have in avoiding radical messages, in avoiding radical demonstrations, because they have the pulse of what's happening in our plazas and in our streets. And it is very instrumental, the power that a local leader has to avoid this type of radicalism, we can say, and to avoid violence in our territories that then they can escalate into international conflicts. Of course, we have loss and damages and climate change. We are going through the climate justice perspective, which comes from the advisory recommendations of the International Court of Justice in terms of the responsibility states and companies have towards climate change. And this also makes accountable our own constituency of cities in terms of how we can go in terms of jurisprudence to tackle the climate agenda, and how can we access or not the loss and damages fund. And this is particularly the case for Global South cities that are already impacted by climate change, and that we need to make accountable our international system to what it's already happening. We have energy, of course, and then many other thematics that we can go, but these are some of the examples of where we are acting together. And then, of course, something close to our world today, which is migration, which is dignifying human mobility, being active in the way mayors understand their city dwellers as neighbors, no matter on their legal situation during the days that they are either passing, working, or living in their cities. And by this, we have what we call the Lampedusa Charter for a dignified human mobility, and a formal call to action of local action on migration and refugees that we have launched with UNHCR, IOM, and UCLG together with the Mayors Migration Council. I know that we're talking about a lot of names, a lot of actions, but it is only to give you a bit of where we stand, because we are in every agenda in an organized and self-organized representative way.
Yes, I can really see the breadth of that. And if I may just ask a sort of naive follow-up question. When you're getting, say, 250,000, I mean, I know not all of them are coming together at once, but all of these mayors coming together at once to say, let's, talk about housing or talk about poverty or migration. Is it mostly information sharing? I mean, in some cases, it sounds like you're coming up with frameworks for advocacy in the case of culture, or is it, because I imagine all cities have different challenges. So what are the very specific ways in which, and not taking too much time, but in which cities might work together? Does it go beyond information sharing, or
so
yes,
how does it work? It starts with where what we're seeking is political mandate, and this is the first thing that we need, which is political commitment to the agenda. So I would say this is the first step, and this is something it works in English not that much, what we call the power of we, and this is the first we care for this agenda, and we want to have political engagement in these of the thematics, and by this we have different ways of engaging. One is bringing local voices to the intergovernmental negotiations, representing our constituency. So this would be the political space. But then we learn, we research, and we finance, which is, we have a lot of peer learning between peers. And this is what we do as an international network. What we train is training of trainers. So we train trainers so that they can escalate and bring to everywhere what we are doing. We do a lot of research, because it is very complicated to follow up with the national indicators, particularly at an international level. So we facilitate the research and the voluntary local reviews of cities to the different agendas. And finally, we finance, and we advocate for financing, to having a different conversation about bankability, about access to funds, about risk management, and this goes both with private sector and multilateral development banks. And by this we have the FMDV, which is the fund for cities and different mechanisms that we can send you information later. But this is kind of the three.
Thank you. That's great, and I think that was what I was interested in, the research, the finance, and beyond. So that's terrific. Thank you. Kristen, turning back to you, and actually before I turn back to you, I just want to let everyone know who's listening, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box, and I'll get to that after just a couple more questions for our panelists. So Kristen, also turning to you with some concrete areas, both of success that you've seen in your work on subnational diplomacy, but also something that we haven't talked about, which are some of the challenges and risks associated with city diplomacy.
Right, right. Well, the great thing about city diplomacy is that it's pragmatic and it offers transferable solutions to the most pressing everyday problems people face. So whether it's public safety or education or quality of life, and it's a much more practical, entrepreneurial, and flexible diplomacy than you would find at the federal level. So in New York City, we saw a lot of successes by sharing what works and then learning from others. For example, we led a best practices exchange with Barcelona that helped inspire New York City's new sanitation containerization initiative, which rolled out in late 2024 and got garbage off the streets, helped mitigate the rodent problem, which was a huge quality of life issue. We also built strong public-private partnerships, like with the Makoko Foundation, which provided 10,000 eCornell leadership scholarships for New Yorkers. We launched a pilot program for a global youth exchange with New York City high schoolers from disadvantaged neighborhoods. And we created a global gun trafficking forum with senior defense ministers and law enforcement officials from the CARICOM nations, Mexico, Canada, ATF, and the NYPD. And speaking of the NYPD, they've been involved in city diplomacy for decades. Pablo talked about how this has gone back a long time. This is the perfect example. They have an international liaison program, which began after 9/11, and they now have officers permanently stationed in more than a dozen countries. This helps us share intelligence and respond faster when crises happen. So if you remember the 2017 horrific West Side Highway terrorist attack, our detective based in Abu Dhabi was able to fly to Uzbekistan, where the prime suspect was from, within hours to help investigate. And then more recently, our officer who's based in Doha played a key role in the 2022 FIFA World Cup, training local police in counterterrorism. And they even have a post in Bogota to help address cross-border trafficking issues. Another prime example that I like to give, which is one of the more well-known ones on the benefits of subnational diplomacy, was in 2022. If you remember, the US's 9th annual Summit of the Americas became a diplomatic nightmare after numerous Latin American heads of state announced they would not attend in response to the US not inviting Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. So the following year, the Department of State successfully organized a city Summit of the America in Denver, where cities from the previously omitted federal governments like Havana and Caracas attended and were able to have a productive dialogue. Speaking of cities and countries where our federal governments face diplomatic tensions, this is kind of the perfect transition into the risks that come with city diplomacy. And we've spoken a lot about the benefits we get from subnational diplomacy, but local political leaders really need to be aware of the huge risks that can come with deeper engagement, including foreign malign influence efforts from hostile actors. Any city participating in diplomacy with other cities really needs to do their due diligence. Some foreign actors may try to use exchanges or sister city programs to gain access to sensitive sites or to push propaganda. It's also important to keep in mind that cities operate in a different lane than national governments, at least in the US. We can't negotiate or enter into formal treaties with foreign federal governments. This would be illegal. It would violate the Mitchell Act. So it's important that city-to-city engagement stays focused on practical collaboration, not formal diplomacy. And I think for these reasons, it's really important to have a strong vetting process, clear guardrails, and thoughtful oversight overall, especially for smaller or newer cities that are getting involved and more active on the global stage.
Great, thank you. That was a terrific overview. And I feel like, so we started with you, Raf, kind of the big picture. And we've touched on a lot of themes here, and I kind of want to take it back to the big picture, which almost makes a lot more sense now to me, which is that we're in this world that really seems to be going into a phase of fragmentation. It's something that I hear constantly, whether it's, we're talking about multilateralism or just general fragmentation, both geopolitically, geoeconomically. So based on this long tradition that cities have of working together, but then also that tension between city and federal governments, how, do you see the rise of cities and city diplomacy as another level of fragmentation? What is the dynamic that's happening between what's happening on this larger geopolitical level and the growth of city diplomacy? And, what's your outlook?
Thanks, Courtney. I would say, let's say 3 points on this. Well, first of all, at the global level, there is a lot of cooperation, as Pablo and Kirsten suggested. I mean, a lot of cooperation at the multilateral level. There is a very important process that is called habitat process within the United Nations that many expect to bring about a new conventions, like the Convention on the Rights of Children, the Convention on the Rights of Women, the Convention on the Rights of Aboriginal People. At some point, there will be perhaps a convention on the rights on urban governance, and this will set a standard that then cities everywhere around the world will somehow have to stick to. So in that sense, I mean, there is a level of convergence and cooperation that we shouldn't forget. Now, at the same time, and this is the second level, it's not always cooperation. Cities also create tensions. Cities can also play the level of the game of geopolitics. 2 or 3 examples, just to give a gist of that. A few years ago, the mayor of Tokyo set up a fundraising initiative to buy an island that is positioned in between China and Japan. If you are Japanese, you call this Senkaku Island. If you are Chinese, you call it Dayogo Island. That's a very clear example of how a city can, a mayor can escalate a bilateral tension between 2 countries. Then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Department of State intervened somehow. But other cases about how China forced some of its cities to suspend and stop cooperation with other cities in Europe because of tensions, bilateral tension between China and these countries. Or we might think about, looking at the most recent cases, the Israeli settlement in the West Bank. I would say quite fueling to the conflict, for the conflict. So in that sense, cities, yes, cooperate and are very and work together, but not always. Cities, unfortunately, I mean, cities are political animals, so they also compete. Think about the competition to get the hosting of big events, expos, Olympics, games. I mean, the competition is fierce. I mean, it's not love and peace, it's competition. So that's another level that we shouldn't forget. And then I would like to conclude with a general consideration about, I mean, we need to understand that there is a growing process of urbanization everywhere in the world. Cities are getting bigger and bigger. Some projections are kind of a nightmare. At the end of the century, cities like Lagos or Kinshasa will be almost 100 million people living in the same city. I mean, that's what we're talking about. So cities getting bigger and bigger, getting more and more into international politics, but also transforming a bit politics at the national level. This is not always true, but often cities tend to be a bit more open, more cosmopolitan because of migrants, because of kind of liberal attitudes. We can see already in many states, in many countries, a tension between the countryside and the big cities, between a certain conservative attitude and a more liberal attitude. Now, if you couple this with the process of urbanization, this is going to have an effect and to alter the political balance in many countries. We saw this, for instance, for the Brexit. I mean, Brexit voters were not in London, were mostly in the countryside in many regions outside big cities. And we see also the electoral turnout in the US and many other countries. So this is something that I think will also have a fragmentation effect or a polarization effect within states. And I think it's another effect that we need to take into account when we talk about polarization and fragmentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent point about that urban-rural divergence. Thank you. This was terrific, and I already see a lot of great questions coming in the Q&A box. And again, if you're listening and have a question you'd like to ask, please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'm going to start with you, Kristen. We have a couple of questions here about AI and how that's rapidly changing all aspects of life. And so kind of a two-part question, and Pablo, you might want to jump in here as well. Please, anyone, feel free, but I'll start with you, Kristen, just from the more business perspective. So do you see AI factoring into this, either from the direct business relationships or when you worked within New York City? And are there any examples, and Pablo, you might have examples on the use of AI to help cities deal with their problems and challenges?
Sure. So yes, and again, I left my role there over a year ago, so I'm a little bit rusty on that topic. But as I said before, what cities do is they exchange best practices, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I know when the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, came to New York City a few years ago, he said New York City is his closest peer city. It's not Manchester, it's not Liverpool. So oftentimes the big cities in the US have more in common with our international counterparts than with some of our domestic peers. So AI can be an example of that. So what's going to work in London might be very replicable to what's working in New York City. There was an effort to use the chatbots on 311 calls. I think that rollout had a little bit of some snafus. There were some efforts to streamline and digitize services so cities can help share with each other which platforms are most helpful and secure in doing so. But I think that's how cities can really engage with each other on AI. And then as well, I know the Economic Development Corporation of New York City, from an economic development perspective, is doing a lot to build out the AI ecosystem here. They just launched something called the International Landing Pad to try to get more international entrepreneurs and startups focused on AI. And then the next thing, quantum computing as well. So there's an economic development angle also.
And Pablo, is there anything that you'd want to add based on what you've seen from mayors working in terms of the concrete areas of AI integration?
Well, I think there are three things. One is using AI to deliver and for the implementation of the agendas. For instance, there are many AI complex models that are being used, and I have the example of the city of Barcelona that has one of the quantum computers, the Mare Nostrum, which is a high-performance computer, supercomputing system that is able to develop super complex scenarios for the future. And for instance, one of the political decisions of amplifying or not the airport of Barcelona was very influenced by these scenarios that were presented by the supercomputer to the different political groups in the municipality, which is putting to the service of the political decisions what AI can do or not. Second, well, of course, is the efficiency of many programs, of course, taking care of the workers and dignifying the role of the public servants, which is a part of the defense that we have to do on the future of jobs. But second, there are two things. One is digital rights, and we have the Global Coalition for Digital Rights, which is there is a role from the public sphere to defend the rights of people within the digital transformation and artificial intelligence. And this is something that cities have been very active. And second is the role that cities have as leaders of the territories in hosting AI capacities, using the water that is needed, having the social dialogue when they are hosting this infrastructure. And this goes both with hosting AI facilities, but as well hosting lithium, minerals, and everything that goes, because we need to know that this is hosted in cities. And this is hosted and this is led always by a mayor. And the social dialogue with the population has to go there. So this is trying to build a case of why mayors are relevant for these conversations. Not only by the mainstream and the day-to-day discussions, but the actual people's everyday life that can be transformed in different ways and the impact this has.
That's a great point, and that's very interesting about the infrastructure for AI and how that has to be really a municipal city-led thing. Raf, we have a question here. Do you think city diplomacy can help rebuild trust and effective dialogue across borders when traditional national diplomacy falls short?
Definitely, I would say. I mean, this was historically the case. We have seen this in many in many conflict-ridden situations. Typically, during the Cold War, there was a discussion, a dialogue between Western European and Eastern European cities that were under the dominance of Moscow. So in that sense, and in many other cases, we saw dialogues. To some extent, the fact that cities are not armed, they don't have armed forces, no? They have police, but they're not armed forces. The fact that they don't play primarily geopolitics, make them more inclined or prone to dialogue. Often they tackle, let's say, low politics issues, very practical issues, very closely linked to the needs of the citizens. And there, perhaps it's easier to find some commonalities, to find some dialogue and sharing of best practices. So absolutely, I think cities can play a reassuring and lowering the tension at the international level. Not always, as I said, sometimes they are part and parcel of escalation phases. So let's not be totally blind. I mean, yes, most of the time they are good actors, but sometimes, well, not so good.
Makes sense. There's nothing that's ever 100%, right? Kristen, we have a question here. What kinds of private sector partnerships have been most effective in helping cities strengthen their international engagement or tackle global challenges?
Well, thank you. There's actually over 200 city diplomacy networks out there. You have Pablo's organization, you have C40 that deals, a lot of them deal with sustainability and climate change issues. You have Strong Cities Network, which deals with violent extremism. The list goes on and on. So for smaller cities that want to engage, you can absolutely tap into those. But I think, as I said before, the most effective city diplomacy are ones that focus on specific issues that a city is facing and learning from your counterparts. And then I also wanted to, I noticed there's a question on MOUs from someone for solidifying partnerships between subnational states. My personal opinion is I think it's great for virtue signaling. I think it's great for public relations, but MOUs don't really achieve anything. It's an agreement to further discuss something. I don't think many concrete things often come out of them.
All right, that's great. Thank you. I was about to get to that question next, so I'm glad that you were able to tackle that. One question here, Raf, I'll give it to you. And again, if Kristen or Pablo, if you'd like to jump in, please do. But the question is, how important are the presence of universities or centers of excellence in planning a city's future?
Well, I think you go global, you develop city diplomacy initiatives if you transform your mindset. It is very important that the mentality of the leaders, the political leaders at the urban level, is attuned or in line and socialized with a more international outlook. If you have a very vernacular mayor, well, probably city diplomacy won't be very active. I mean, so assuming, not always the case, but assuming that universities and other cultural and intellectual centers can shape and train leaders into being more open to global affairs, I would say yes, we could expect some kind of correlation between the presence of universities in the city, the training of future leaders, and the opening of that city to the world. Obviously, that's not the only factor. That's not the only variable, if you want. There are many others. But I think the mentality, it is very important, and how citizens, how leaders are socialized. And of course, the socialization comes also from below, the pressure from citizens that can sort of transform a bit the attitude of the mayors toward being more open to the international affairs.
I'd love to jump in there as well. I think universities are incredibly important at sparking innovation and catalytic investment in innovation to help build out ecosystems and whatever the next thing is. If you look at Kendall Square in Boston, an entire biotech hub, the leading in the world, which is helping us cure diseases, was built out around the universities of MIT and Harvard. And then, the case of New York City, again, partnering between Cornell and Technion University of Israel to help build out our life sciences sector. So I think they're incredibly important, and there's a lot of opportunities for universities to partner. Is kind of a subset of city diplomacy as well.
Great, thank you for that addition. Pablo, what innovations or models have you seen that are helping cities exert more influence on global agendas like climate resilience or development?
Well, I mean, it depends on which side of the world we are talking and what type of city. But I would say that the most innovative public policy or innovative approach is always finance. We need to innovate in the way we finance because the current financial architecture is not updated. The way we understand risk and bankability is not updated. The way that we have linked to GDP everything that we measure and the possibility of measuring innovation and investment to GDP is also outdated. So I would say that for climate, resilience, and many other agendas, creativity comes on how we access funding. How do we measure this impact in different ways, going beyond the traditional way of going with indicators? And by this, there are many innovative ways. I mean, we have the municipal green funds. We have the subnational development banks, which is a very innovative way of getting access to funding. We have different type of facility funds and city-friendly facility funds that are being used to absorb the risk that is not granted by traditional member state-led development banks. So I would say my answer is innovation comes in the way we finance, because there are many ways to innovate in public policy. I can name many, but if we don't have access to a different type of financing, these will all go to the records and not to people's lives. And by this, I'm going beyond the global north, which is there is a lot of pressure to innovate on how we finance development in Africa, in Latin America, and in some parts of Asia.
Right. We're sticking on the finance part. Kristen, I have a question here, and they write, New York is both a U.S. city and an important global player in the world of international finance. How can it use that role to strengthen U.S. influence abroad?
This kind of goes more into, I think, city business diplomacy, commercial diplomacy, which is already happening, especially with this administration. Business leaders still have very strong relationships with investors abroad, their subsidiaries abroad, their peer organizations abroad, whether engaging through an organization like mine or just as a standalone. They're really keeping those strong bonds and those lines of communication open when things are stalled at the federal level. But I think we're already using our role to influence abroad in financial markets.
Okay, great. Thank you. Raf, we have a question here that's asking about, I'm going to try to consolidate it, but basically talking about instability within cities and what the ramifications of that might be. So is there a challenge to, let's say, sorry, it just disappeared. Let me see. Population implosions, like could related instability spill across borders into conflict, or with dislocation caused by gentrification? How is there a connection between what might happen at a city level and what might happen at a more national level? You know, can that spill across, not even just within the nation itself, but across borders?
Well, let's say cities, especially large cities, are receiving significant inflows of migrants from abroad. So there is a national dimension, but also an international dimension. Big cities are a hub of global migrations. And this is important in determining their identity and their political orientation. And this creates a cumulative effect. So year after year, decades after decades, these cities transform their identity over time. So on the one hand, and these migratory flows depends on many things, including conflicts. Sometimes migrants escape, are fleeing conflicts, and so they come as asylum seekers or simply escaping conflict-ridden areas. So the first connection, I would say, is about migrants coming from outside for different reasons, sometimes security-related reasons. Another dimension is the process of the stratification and reshaping of cities. We have seen, for instance, during COVID, there was a move of people getting out of the city center, downtown, to more suburb areas. This has not totally consolidated in the following years, but clearly one challenge, and this is important for all cities, is the social segregation and segmentation. It is a challenge. On this, there is a significant dialogue and exchange of knowledge and best practices among different cities internationally. But clearly, this can create instability in the social context. And of course, this may also have some kind of indirect impact at the national level. Now, that this can lead to more conflictual situation, well, maybe I'm a bit resistant to think to that. But yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Pablo, question here. Are east-west or north-south city relationships more important today? So are you seeing any kind of geographic trends in terms of the way cities tend to work together?
Well, I would start with what I said at the beginning, which is cities want to work with all cities, and going beyond adjectives of good or bad relations, and accepting that they are political actors. Of course, they respond to geopolitical scenarios. And by this, I would say that there is more than a trend in terms of north, south, east, west. There is a trend in sectoral, as Kristen was referring. There is a trend on climate related issues, on migration through the Mayor's Council. Climate is C40 and ICLEI. We have the U20 to talk with the G20. But we are starting to see the regionalization of this. And for instance, we just in the framework of UCLG, we have the BRICS Association of Local and Regional Governments, which is new ways of gathering. We have, of course, every time we have a government that is not into the global agendas, as the current one in the United States of America, Then the organized US Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities become more relevant to the international arena than in times of different types of leadership in the US. Things like this, I would say that they do respond to the geopolitical spaces, but that cities are a good example of what the 2030 agenda did very successfully, of having a global agenda. There is one global agenda to tackle inequalities. The right to housing is the same in the streets of Los Angeles than in the slums of Nairobi, because what we are trying to guarantee with different solutions is the same right to housing, I would say. So it's not putting them in the beyond the good or the bad, but it's saying that there is appetite to talk between capital cities, small towns, associations of local and governments beyond geopolitics, but that there is a regionalization, there is, and this is something that we cannot deny. In a different way, because the BRICS don't correspond to a specific region, but to a type of interest. And we have a very active Arab Towns organization. We have a very active Asia Pacific region in terms of cities. So I would say this.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see, we have a few minutes left. And so what I think I might do here is we have, let's see, a question that I'd like to give to all of you as sort of kind of a final thought, which would be, and the question is, if you have one wish for helping cities, well, actually, maybe I'll give you something to choose from. Either one wish for helping cities, what would it be? Or if you want to take the darker perspective, what is the thing that keeps you up at night about city diplomacy? So you can either choose if you could wave a magic wand, what would it be to help city diplomacy? Or what is the thing that keeps you up at night about city diplomacy? And why don't I start with you, Raf,
Okay.
on that one?
Well, what I wish for city leaders and city citizens, in fact, is to get more and more familiar with international affairs. I think city diplomacy, the internationalization of cities, it is something that can bring about benefits to the cities. I mean, I tend to be more on the positive side. I do think that city diplomacy can be beneficial to cities. So it is up to the leaders and the citizens to understand this and to take advantage of that. One important thing that they should do is to think about what the so-called city branding. And city branding, it's not just marketing, oh, I want to sell my cities. It's first and foremost thinking about what is the identity of your city? What is the unique message, unique way of life, unique, if you want, storytelling that you find only in that city and not in other cities? And yes, of course, you can use that for marketing purposes, but I think ultimately it's about a self-awareness of who you are and who you want to be. I think this is an exercise that all cities should do in order to increase their self-awareness. And then also, of course, using this at the international level, presenting them as something that is attractive and for all purposes, political, business, economic, social, whatever. So I think this exercise of self-reflection about your own identity and who you want to be in the international system, I think it's a very important exercise. So I wish cities engage in this exercise a bit more.
Great. Kristen, what about you?
What was the option other than what keeps me awake at night? What was the other question?
If you could wave a magic wand, what's your wish for cities?
I'd like to see cities become more efficient overall. One city I'd like to highlight, I think does a great job at this, which I think can be replicated in other cities, is the city of Helsinki, where I just recently did a Fulbright with their mayor's office there this summer. They do a great job at delivering services efficiently and quickly to its citizens. They've done a great job with their sustainability initiatives in a way, unlike most of the EU, that's not at the same time creating this overregulation that's curbing innovation. They've done a great job at building out different entrepreneurial ecosystems, supporting local entrepreneurs, an amazing job with childcare, with viewing childcare as an essential public service, which has enabled them to get a large portion of women into the workforce, into the economy, and contribute there. And has helped with their mental health overall rankings as well. So that's a kind of a North Star city I think many others can emulate.
Well, that's great. Final word, Pablo, either magic wand or what keeps you up at night? In 36
it's
or less if you can.
Helping cities is making the multilateral system more democratic, because by helping cities, we are helping their constituents. And there is a democratic crisis. So bringing cities into the international affairs agenda is democratizing our multilateral system. And the threat that we have today is towards democracy. So the way of helping cities, or why are we helping cities? Because we are trying to bring closer these institutions to the people. And by bringing them closer, we can defend democracy.
That is a great place to end on it. Thank you, all of you. I learned a lot. I have this renewed appreciation for cities in the global system. And I really appreciate everyone who attended and the questions you asked. This will be eventually online, so if you didn't catch all of it or you want to share it, please check our website or our YouTube channel. And we do have a few just basic housekeeping announcements before we break. I know we're a little over time. We do have our next event, which is this Thursday. It's open to all. It's about the Arctic, which is actually a really great time for this because, as we just heard today, I think China just made the first, I think the ship just made the first China to European route. So the sea lanes are open. So that's free and open to all. That's this Thursday at noon Eastern time. And with that, I think, and then we have for members only, if you'd like to join as a member, we'll be talking about aid and the way aid is changing in this system. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. We are a nonprofit. If you can donate, we always appreciate it. And to all of our wonderful speakers, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.